Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. As we approach the COVID quieted New Year, my wife and I sit and chat, mostly about the quotidian, what to do tonight, that we have a new grand doggie. We wryly smile that excitement is a trip to the supermarket. But in the silences, thoughts, some psychology related, enter my mind. First, a COVID ethical dilemma. There's the ethics of who to vaccinate. It seems unarguable that first responders should get it first. But is it so clear that the elderly should be next in line? Yes, old people, especially if they have multiple underlying conditions, are more at risk of hospitalization and death from COVID. But is that the only factor that should be considered? Working people have more to contribute to society and to family. And the elderly, especially if they have multiple underlying conditions, if saved from COVID, could well die a more prolonged death, for example from cancer or from a severely incapacitating stroke, tormenting, perhaps for years, themselves and their family. This reminds me of a classic ethical dilemma. Three people are on a rowboat in the middle of an isolated ocean, 7 days from land. There's probably only enough water for one person to make it. Do you divide the water equally? Do you give it to the oldest person who is at greatest risk of dying? Or do you give it to the 30-year-old on the boat, who if he survives will have another half century to live and is in the prime of his or her career? Would it matter if the latter person were a ditch digger or a cancer researcher? I am not at all sure about this issue. For example, it might be that this sort of questioning starts us down a dangerous slope. But I do believe it's an issue that's worth thinking about and discussing. The next thought that's been popping to my mind here at New Year's is, how can religion survive? Religious people find comfort in there being a loving God, omniscient, omnipotent, and benevolent. How has religion survived so long in the face of so much undeserved suffering? For example, pandemics, from the Black Plague to COVID. And then there are the natural disasters like earthquakes, and that countless babies have been born with horrific diseases to live only weeks in agony, and then leaving bereft parents. That term "God works in mysterious ways" seems an inadequate explanation. I would think that all the world's undeserved pain would decimate people's belief in religion. Atop that, from the Renaissance to the present, we live in a society that venerates the rational, the scientific, and today in which its mind molder in chief, the media, so often portrays religious people as foolish or evil. I guess we all need one crutch or another. Plus, organized religion does provide a community of life-thinking people. The next thought that pops into my mind now, it's COVID-related, psychology-related, at the New Year is, why are some people much more resilient? Why do some people, hearing the very same fear-inducing news about COVID, manage to stay upbeat and even resilient when the disease hits close to home, or even after they've been physically assaulted? I would guess that people who are resilient to that are more likely to permanently quell their bad habits, overeating, abusing drugs, committing crime. Yeah, 2/3 of felons soon recidivate, but 1/3 does not. Those same factors probably also help people keep to their resolutions, New Year's and otherwise. What might those differentiating factors be? It's probably some combination of their thought process, their physiological predisposition, their peers, their life. But sometimes it's just a single factor, such as being told, "You can't do that." The desire to prove someone wrong is powerful. Or maybe the person is thrust into a situation so compelling, like having a loved one be dying, that they feel sobered into, or even just too busy to bother with overeating or drug abuse. Or sometimes they're just tired of being sick and tired. The next issue that's been popping to mind is, should we pity the politician? What goes through politicians' minds and hearts in deciding how much to lock down people and businesses, or in choosing to leave schools closed to attempt to quell COVID? Regarding the latter, it must make them feel guilty to create such headaches for parents needing childcare, and also reduce children's learning. Even we adults would have a hard time sitting, let alone learning, in front of Zoom for hours each day. Imagine a child, imagine an active child being asked to do that. After all, both logic and data would seem to argue that the schools should open. The logic: kids are more carefully controlled in a school than out. where kids can run free, for example, as I might have done as a kid, play in-your-face basketball. And the data supports opening schools. For example, a report released just this month from the Educational Policy Collaborative Initiative reviewed the COVID school closure data from 122 Washington and Michigan counties. That study found that, quote, accounting for both pre-existing cases and a richer set of covariates brings estimates of the benefits of closing schools close to zero on average, end quote. So, as politicians claim, are they merely, quote, following the science, or are psychological pressures or pressures from special interest groups at play? I've also been thinking about democracy. Speaking of our decision makers, mostly who are elected, democracy is unassailed by both the left and right, but it does have serious downsides. The populace is liberally laced with people easily manipulated by candidates' sophisticated manipulation machines. Should we necessarily accept as an article of faith that the best approach to selecting our leaders is to trust that populace, to make those in their voting? After all, according to a review in Psychology Today, 55% of Americans believe in angels. Only 39% accept the concept of evolution. 34% believe in ghosts. The average American reads on a 7th or 8th grade level, and 4%, quote, can't read well enough to perform activities of daily living in a modern society, let alone to take a literacy test, end quote. Given that our elected leaders' decisions are often questioned, perhaps especially regarding COVID, even by many top thinkers, is it at all possible that society would net be better if our government leaders were selected passively? For example, our president could be the most cited philosopher of the past decade, a so-called philosopher king. Would our legislators make wiser policy if they consisted of the winners of Professional Association's Person of the Decade, teacher, scientist, plumber, plus, say, 10% chosen at random? Next, I was thinking about the un- and underemployed. Woe be them. Speaking of the populace, I do worry what's going to happen to the millions of people who will be chronically un- and underemployed. It was a problem before COVID. It's a bigger problem now. After all, we live in an information-centric, abstract-thinking world in which jobs requiring a sub-100 IQ usually don't pay a living wage or increasingly are automated. There are over 100 million American adults with an IQ below 100, 30 million with an IQ below 85. The trend seems to be to redistribute to them from taxpayers housing, health care, transportation, food stamps, and so on. Will there be enough taxpayer money to pay for all that without it eating our seed corn? Will the recipients continue to accept a low standard of living? How will they react to long-term not having a job, let alone a rewarding job? And how much of that effect will be internal, depression, substance abuse, domestic abuse, and how much will spill into violence? Now my thoughts are turning to, is it better to be a scholar or a plumber? A life of the mind feels virtuous and expansive, while that of the plumber seems so lackluster and narrow. Yet I think of the many scholars who ended up contributing less to humankind than does the plumber, who every day helps at least one person whose toilet is overflowed. I think even of how happy I was when the plumber replaced the corroded leaky pipe from my dishwasher. It seems, for example, that there are so many intellectual cooks creating our COVID response broth, and it may be of unclear, at least, net benefit. Yet, when on my neighborhood's online forum I post that I have a good plumber or even a handyman, I get much relieved and effusive appreciation. And finally, regarding censorship, I worry deeply that we can't have full-dimension discussion of core issues. The cancel culture is reminiscent of McCarthyism and Nazism, but this time it's from the left. Will we never learn? Careers and lives of intelligent, well-meaning, right-of-center thinkers are being ruined by people who are too cocksure that the left is always right. Not all wisdom resides left of center. The takeaway? People who watch these YouTube videos of mine, or readers of Psychology Today, where the transcript of this will be, tend to value the life of the mind. So, as we enter a hopefully better 2021, perhaps you'll want your thoughts and New Year's discussions to include issues that go beyond hats and horns. In any event, I do thank you for watching. I'm Marty Nemko. I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments, and especially like it if you hit the share button below, share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. In any event, I do thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko.